So today I'm actually doing a little bit of shop reorganization, and since I have a lot of things out of the way, I thought I'd take this video and share with you a little bit about my workbench. So as you can see, I'm reorganizing a few things out here, and I actually have my workbench completely I guess empty. Normally I have a bunch of stuff under there, but I'm actually moving a couple things, and I thought I'd share with you a little bit about this workbench, when I built it, and stuff like that. So while I'm talking, I'll just kind of walk around it and give you a few different angles here. So I actually built this workbench during the spring break of last year, so it's been right around 10 months since I built this bench. Yeah, this was actually a Paul Sellers design workbench. There have also been a number of other YouTubers such as Wrangler Star who actually built this same style workbench, and I actually really like the design, and that's why I decided to do this one. There's this design, a Roubeau style, and a few other different styles that I was looking at when I decided to build a strong, sturdy workbench, because before what I was working on was a really dinky old dining room table, and I showed that in one of the last videos about a week ago. I think I actually have a few pictures where I was building this during the process, and when I was building this workbench, I didn't have a YouTube channel, so I have a few pictures here that I'll show you. So all of the wood for this project I purchased at my local hardware store. I didn't have to buy anything special or anything like that. These legs were also mortised and tenoned together, as you can see down there, and I actually made them stick out just a hair bit, maybe 1/8 of an inch or so. And there are these cross members that go right here and also in here. And the neat thing about this bench is you can actually disassemble it into the tool well and the two tabletops and the legs. The way that you do that is underneath there are these lag bolts that go up into the top of the bench, and you can just take those out, take these carriage bolts out here, and that is how you would then remove the top and transport it or move it or whatever you need to do. So underneath the workbench here, you can see that the apron actually hangs down a little bit, and the neat thing about this is that the leg is actually recessed into the apron 3/4 of an inch, and there's a wedge lock system where you put the wedge in. There's a dado that is housed in this leg, and you pull that wedge down and it keeps the bench from rocking side to side. And also when I mounted the vise under here, I had to go in about 1/2 inch to let the screw and the sides of the vise go in there. And here's a better look at that apron where it's housed in there. So the top of this workbench is 2 separate parts and the tool well in the middle. This is composed of 8 2x6s on both sides and a 2x12 in the middle. Now those dimensions are slightly under, so when I ended up building this, I hand planed all of the faces together, and then I glued each one and squeezed them together as hard as I could with all of the pipe clamps that I had, and I let them sit for 1.5 days for each one because there was so much glue that had to go into each one. And you can see that it has cracked a little bit on here, and I actually covered this whole end grain face on all the faces with Elmer's glue, and I did maybe 10 coats of that glue, and it's actually really built up on here, and that's prevented these edges from cracking because this wood was green and it had a lot of moisture still in the wood. It was really prone to cracking, and there were a few spots on the workbench where after a few weeks after I built it, there were some spots where it opened up, and I just filled those in the best I could. There weren't too many gaps, but I really would recommend keeping them in the clamps for probably 2 days to really let that glue sit and cure. This is the Wilton vise that I have. This is a really old, kind of antique vintage vise, and I restored this right after I built the entire workbench, and you saw how it was mounted underneath there. And then next to that, I have this little kind of dovetailed piece of wood in here. And this thing is actually really neat because it's not actually glued in to the bench. So once I beat this thing up enough, I can actually chip it out and make a new one in here and replace it. I haven't replaced this yet. This is the first one, and you can see I have a few saw marks, and that's from when you keep a piece of wood in the vise and you cut in this direction. Sometimes it runs into the bench, so I just made one of those to kind of clean it up, and I think that actually looks nice. You saw I had two different color woods in there, and this is actually Paduke and a piece of walnut. I actually really like those colors on the workbench. I just have easily could have left this a bare metal and made this like Douglas fir or something, but I think having these little splashes of color on the bench really makes it unique in mine. And this is actually kind of funny. When I put this 2x12 in here, it was butt tight on both sides, and that was when I first built the workbench, and you can see just how much it's shrunken on both sides since then. It's probably shrunk maybe 3/4 of an inch. So I will have to flatten this workbench a few times more before it really doesn't move. There's still some movement in it. Obviously with the change of weather, it's gonna move. So another thing I would recommend for this workbench or any workbench kind of like this is a dogging system on one side. I really love this type of system. Whenever I'm working with a large piece of plywood or even a really wide piece of wood, the dog in the vise along with two bench dogs, and I'm sure you've seen this plenty of times, but the tool well can really hold a whole bunch of stuff in there. I tried to keep this organized because it's really easy to have this thing completely cluttered up with stuff. The reason I really like this is for when I'm working with large plywood, I can actually put the piece across the whole length and not have any interference from the tools. So like I said, I built this whole workbench over spring break. It really took me from right at the crack of dawn until evening for about 7 days to get this thing done. So I didn't actually go off a set of plans for this workbench. Yeah, there weren't really any too major hiccups or mistakes that I made during this. So as far as price goes, I think if I can recall, all of the wood was right around $150 to $175. It was all green 2x6s and I think a couple 4x6s. Then it was also another $25 for all of the lag bolts and the washers and the nuts and all that kind of thing. I'm really happy with the way this whole workbench came out. When I first started looking into building this project, it was actually quite intimidating looking at all the different designs, but I just took my time. And like I said, over the course of that spring break. So yeah, since I was organizing a couple things out here and I had the workbench kind of nice and open, I thought I'd make a separate little video on my workbench. I know a number of you guys have asked a few things about it, so hopefully I answered some of those questions. Yeah, so that is really going to be it for this one. If you enjoyed this little video, I'd love to have you subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have another question about this workbench or anything else out here, leave that down in the comments. So yeah, that is pretty much it for this video, and I will see you guys in the next one.